I need to get that damn audio. But you didn't know actually before I forget. There. Alright everyone, how are you all doing today? So we're back to reading our read along. It's been a while. I haven't done one since I've been reading already. It's not sure the button for that. So, anyways, we have done one since Spooktember. Spooktober. Why do you think Spooktember? Anyways, so we're going back to be reading For the World. Last time we were on chapter 8. So, this won't be a very long read. Maybe an hour, a little bit less. Alright, so shall we begin, everyone? Chapter 8 Friday Night. The most extraordinary thing to my mind of all the strange and wonderful things that happened upon that Friday was the dovetailing of the commonplace habits of our social order with the first beginning of a series of events. That was a topple that social order had long. If on Friday night you had taken a pair of compasses and drawn a circle with a radius 5 miles round the Woking sandpits, I doubt if you would have had one human being outside it, unless it were some relation of Stent or of the 3 or 4 cyclists our London people landed on the common, whose emotions or habits all were at all affected by the newcomers. Many people had heard of the cylinder, of course, and talked about it in their leisure, but it certainly did not make any sensation that an ultimatum to Germany would have done. In London that night, poor Henderson's telegram described the gradual unscrewing of the shot was judged to be a canard in his evening paper. After wiring for authentication from him and received no reply, the man was killed, decided to print a special edition. Even within the 5-mile circle, the great majority of people were inert. I have already described the behavior of the men and women to whom I spoke. In all over the district, people were dining and supping. Working men were gardening after the labors of the day. Children were being put to bed. Young people were wandering through the lanes love-making. Students sat over their books. Maybe there was a murmur in the village streets, a novel and dominant topic in the public houses, and here and there a messenger, or even an eyewitness of the later occurrences, caused a whirl of excitement, a shouting and a running to and fro. But for the most part of the daily routine of working, eating, drinking, sleeping went on as it had done for countless years. And though no planet Mars existed in the sky, even at working stations in Horseout and Chobham, that was the case. In Woking Junction, until a late hour, trains were stopping and going. Others were shunting on the sidings. Passengers were aligning and waiting, and everything was proceeding in the most ordinary way. A boy from the town, trenching on Smith's monopoly, was selling papers with the afternoon's news. The ringing impact of trucks, the sharp whistle of the engines from the junction, mingled with their shouts of "Men from Mars!" Excited men came into the station and about 9 o'clock with incredible tidings and caused no more disturbance than drunkards might have done. People rattling Londonwards peered into the darkness outside the carriage windows and saw only a rare, flickering, vanishing spark dance up from the direction of Horsell, a red glow and a thin veil of smoke stepping across the stars. And though that nothing more than serious than a hellfire was happening, it was only around the edge of the common that any disturbance was perceptible. There were half a dozen villas burning on the Woking border. There were lights in all the houses on the common side of the three villages. The people there kept awake till dawn. A curious crowd lingering restless, people coming and going, but the crowd remaining. Both on the Chobham and Horsham bridges. One or two adventurous souls, it was afterwards found, went into the darkness and crawled quite near the Martians, but they never returned. For now and again, a light ray, like the beam of a warship's searchlight, swept the common, and the heat ray was ready to follow. Save for such, that big area of common was silent and desolate, and the charred bodies lay about on it all night under the stars. And all about the next day, a noise of hammering from the people was heard about by many people. Yes. So you have heard the state of things on Friday night. In the Centra, sticking into the skin of our old planet Earth like a poison dart, was this cylinder. But the poison was scarcely working yet. Around it was a patch of silent common, smoldering in places, and with a few dark, dimly seen objects lying in contorted attitudes here and there. Here and there was a burning bush or tree. Beyond was a fringe of excitement, and farther than the fringe the inflammation had not crept not crept as yet. In the rest of the world, the stream of life still flowed as it had flowed in the immemorial years. The fever of war that would presently clog vein and artery, deaden nerve and destroy brain, had still to develop. All night long, the Martians were hammering and stirring, sleepless, indefatigable, indefatigable. At work upon the machines, they were making ready. And ever and again, a puff of greenish-white smoke rolled up the starlit sky. About 11, a company of soldiers came through Horsham and deployed along the edge of the common to form a cordon. Later, a second company marched through Cobham to deploy on the north side of the common. Several officers from the Inkerman barracks had been on the common earlier in the day, and one, Major Eden, was reported to be missing. The colonel of the regiment came to the Chobham Bridge and was busy questioning the crowd at midnight. The military authorities were certainly alive to the seriousness of the business. About 11, the next morning's papers were able to see a squadron of hussars, 2 Maxims, and about 400 men of the Cardigan regiment started from Aldershot A few seconds after midnight, the crowd in the churchy road, working, saw a star fall from the heaven into the pine woods to the northwest. It had a greenish color and caused a sudden brightness like summer lightning. This was the second cylinder. Oh, hold on. No, 1 second. No, sorry about that. Mm. Ah, yes. Chapter 9. The fighting begins. Saturday lies. I'm moving around, lovely. That is really annoying. Saturday lies in the memory as a day of suspense. Hey, Saturday lives in the memory as a day of suspense. It was a day of lassitude, too, hot and close, with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuating barometer. I had slept but little, though my wife had succeeded in sleeping, and I rose early. I went into my garden before breakfast and stood listening. But towards the common there was nothing stirring but a lark. The milkman came as usual. I heard the rattle of his chariot, and I went round to the side gate to ask the latest news. He told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops, and that he told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops, and that guns were expected. Then a familiar reassuring note. I heard a train running towards Woking. They aren't to be killed, said the milkman, if that can be possibly be avoided. I saw my neighbor gardening, chatted with him for a time, and then strolled in to breakfast. It was a most unexceptional morning. My neighbor was of opinion that the troops would be able to capture or to destroy the Martians during the day. It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable, he said. It would be curious to know how they live on another planet. We might learn a thing or two. He came up to the fence and extended a handful of strawberries, for his gardening was as generous as it was enthusiastic. At the same time, he told me of the burning of the pine wood about the filthy gold links. They say, he said, that there's another of these blessed things falling there, Number two, well, one surely, but one's enough, surely. This will cost the insurance people a pretty penny before everything's settled. He laughed with an air of the greatest good humor as he said this. The woods, he said, were still burning, and pointing out a haze of smoke to me. They'll be hot underfoot for days, on account of the thick soil of pine needles and turf, he said. And then goes stares over. Poor Ogilvy. After breakfast, instead of working, I decided to walk down towards the common. Under the railway bridge, I found a group of soldiers, sappers, I think, men in small brown caps, dirty red jackets unbuttoned and showing their blue shirts, dark trousers, and boots coming to the calf. They told me no one was allowed over the canal, and looking along the road toward the bridge, I saw one of the cardigan men sitting sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time. I told them of my sight of the Martians on the previous evening. None of them had seen the Martians, and they had but the vaguest ideas of them, so, so that they may blind me with questions. They said that they did not know who had authorized the movements of the troops. Their idea was that a dispute had arisen at the Horse Guards. The ordinary sapper is a great deal better educated than the common soldier, and they discussed the peculiar condition of the possible fight with some acuteness. I had described the heat ray to them, and they began to argue among themselves. Crawl up the uncover and rush him, I say, I, said one. Get on, said another. What's cover against these air eat? Steak to cook here. What we got to do is to go as near as the ground will let us, and then drive a trench. Blow your trenches. You always want trenches. You have been born a rabbit snippy. Anything got any next then? Said a third abruptly. A little contemplative, dark man smoking a pipe. I repeat my description. Octopuses, he said. That's what I calls them. Talk about fishers of men. Fighters of the fishes at this time. It ain't no murder killing beasts like that, said the first speaker. Why not show the darn things strife off and finish them? Said the little dark man. You can't tell what they may do. Where's your shell? Said the first speaker. There ain't no time. Do it in a rush. That's my tip. And do it at once. So they discussed it. After a while, I left them and went on to the railway station to get as many morning papers as I could. But I was not weary of the reader with a description of that long morning into the long afternoon. I did not succeed in getting a glimpse of the common, where even Horsham and Shobham church towers were in the hands of the military authorities. Soldiers I addressed didn't know anything. The officers were mysterious as well as busy. I found people in the town quite secure again, in the presence of the military, and I heard for the first time from Marshall, the tobacconist, that his son was among the dead of the common. The soldier had made the people on the outskirts of Horsham lock up and leave their houses. I got back to lunch about 2, very tired, for as I have said, the day was extremely hot and dull. In order to refresh myself, took a cold bath in the afternoon, about half just past 4. I went up to the railway station to get an evening paper, for the morning papers had contained only a very inaccurate description of the killing of Stent Henderson, the killing of Stent Henderson, Ogilvy, and the others. But there were little I didn't know. The Martins did not show an inch of themselves. They seemed busy in their pit, and there was a sound of hammering and an almost continuous streamer of smoke. Apparently, they were busy getting ready for a struggle. Such attempts had been made to signal, without success, with the stereotyped formula of the papers. A sniper told me it was done by a man in a ditch with a flag and a long pole. The Martians took as much notice of such advances as we should of the lowing of a cow. I must confess the sight of all those armaments and this preparation really excited me. My imagination became belligerent and defeated the invaders in a dozen striking ways. Something of my schoolboy dreams of battle and heroism came back. It hardly seemed a fair fight to me at the time, but it seemed very helpless in that pit of theirs. About 3 o'clock there began the thud of a gun, at measured intervals from Churnsey or Addleston. I learned that the smoldering pine wood into which the second cylinder had fallen was shelled, in the hope of destroying that object before it opened. It was only about 5, however, that a field gun reached Chobham for use against the first body of Martians. About 6 in the evening, I sat at tea with my wife in the summer house talking vigorously about the battle that was lowering upon us. I had heard a muffled detonation from the common, and immediately after a gush of firing, close on the heels of that came a violent rattling crash, quite close to us, that shook the ground, and, starting out upon the lawn, I saw the tops of the trees about the Oriental College burst into a smoky red flame, and the tower of the little church beside it slid down into ruin. The pinnacle of the Mosquito had vanished, and the roof line of the college itself looked as if 100-ton gun had been at work upon it. One of our chimneys cracked as if a shot had hit it, flew, and a piece of it came clattering down the tiles, and made a heap of broken and red fragments upon the flowered bed by my study window. I and my wife stood amarred. Then I realized that the crest of Maybury Hill must be within range of the Martian's heat ray, now that the college was cleared of the way. They're all dead. At that I gripped my wife's arm, and without ceremony ran her out into the road. Then I fetched out the servant, telling her I would go upstairs myself for the box she was clamoring for. "We can't possibly stay here," I said. And as I spoke, the firing reopened for a moment upon the commons. "But where are we to go?" said my wife in terror. I felt perplexed, and then remembered her cousin at Leatherhead. "Leatherhead!" I shouted above a sudden noise. She looked away from me downhill. The people were coming out of their homes astonished. "How are we to get to Leatherhead?" she said. Down the hill, I saw a bevy of hussars right under the railway bridge. 3 got up through the open gate of the Oriental College. 2 others dismounted, and began running from house to house. The sun, shining through the smoke that drove up from the top of the trees, seemed blood red, and threw an unfamiliar lurid light upon everything. Stop here, said I. You are safe here. And I started off at once for the spotted dog. For I knew the landlord had a horse and a dog cart. I ran, for I perceived that in a moment everyone upon the side of the hill would be moving. I found him in his bar, quite unaware of what was going behind his house. A man stood with his back to me, talking to him. I must have a pound, said the landlord. I have no one to drive it. I'll give you two, said I, over the stranger's shoulder. What for? You'll bring it back by midnight, he said. Lord, said the landlord. What's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of a pig. £2 and you bring it back? What's going on now? I explained hastily that I had to leave my home, and so secured the dog cart. At the time it did not seem to me nearly so urgent. The landlord should leave his. I took care to have the cart there and then, drove it off down the road, and leaving in the charge of my wife and servant, rushed into my house and packed a few valuables, such plate as we had, and so forth. The beech trees below the house were burning while I did this, and the palings up the road glowed red. While I was occupied in this way, one of the dismounted hussars came running up. He was going from house to house, warning people to leave. He was going on as I came out my front door, lugging my treasures. Then up in a tablecloth, I shouted after him, "What news?" He turned, stared, bawled, me about, crawling out in a thing like a dish cover. He ran onto the gate of the house of the crest. A sudden whirl of black smoke driving across the road hid him for a moment. I ran to my neighbor's door and rapped to satisfy myself of what I already knew, that his wife had gone to London with him and locked up their house. I went in again, according to my promise, taking my servant's box, lugged it out, clapped it beside her on the tail of the dog cart, and then caught the reins and jumped up into the driver's seat beside my wife. In another moment we were clear of the smoke and noise, and spanking down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill towards Sidwoke of Old Woking. In front was a quite sunny landscape, a wheat field ahead on either side of the road, and the Maybury Inn with its swinging sign. I saw the doctor's cart ahead of me. At the bottom of the hill, I turned my head to look at the hillside. I was leaving. The hillside I was leaving. Thick streamers of black smoke, shot with threads of red fire, were driving up into the still air, and throwing dark shadows upon the green tree tops eastward. The smoke already extended far away to the east and west. The Byfleet Pine was eastward, into Woking on the west. The hill was dotted with people running towards us, and were very faint now, but very distinct through the hot, quiet air, until presently stilled in an intermittent crackle of rifles. Apparently the Martians were setting fire to everything within range of the heat ray. I am not an expert driver, and I had immediately to turn my attention to the horse. When I looked back again, the second hill had hidden the black smoke. I slashed the horse with the whip, and gave him a loose rein until Woking, and soon lay between us in the quivering tumult. I overtook and passed the doctor between Woking and Sent, Chapter 10 In the Storm. Leatherhead is about 12 miles from Maybury Hill. The scent of hay was in the air through the lush meadows beyond Fairford, and the hedges on either side were sweet and gay with multitudes of dog roses. There were firings that had broken out while we were driving down Maybury. Hill ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving the evening very peaceful and still. We got to Leatherhead without misadventure about 9 o'clock, and the horse had an hour's rest while I took supper with my cousin and commended my wife to their care. My wife was curiously silent throughout the drive. She seemed oppressed with forebodings of evil. I talked to her reassuringly, pointing out that the Martians were tied to the pit by sheer heaviness. Yeah, right. I highly doubt that one bit. And the utmost could but crawl a little out of it. But she had answered only in monosyllables. Had it not been for my promise to the innkeeper, she would, I think, have left me to stay in Leatherhead for that night. Well, that I had! Her face, I remember, was very white as we parted. For my own part, I had feverishly excited all day. Something very like the war fever that occasionally runs through a civilized community. It got into my blood. And in my heart, I was not so very sorry that I had returned to Maybury that night. I wish, even afraid that the last fusillade I had heard might meant the extermination of our invaders from Mars. I can best express my state of mind, but saying that I wanted to be in at the death. It was nearly 11 when I started to return. The night was unexpectedly dark to me. Walking out of the lightest passage of my cousin's house, it seemed indeed black, and it was as hot and close to the day. Overhead the clouds were driving fast. I'll bet not a breath stirred the shrubs about us. My cousin's van lit both lamps. Happily, I knew the wood intimately. My wife stood in the light of the doorway and watched me until I jumped up into the dog cart. Then abruptly she turned and went in, leaving my cousin side by the side, wishing me good hap. I was a little depressed at first from the contagion of my wife's fears, but very soon my thoughts were reverted to the Martians. At that time, I was absolutely in the dark as to the course of the evening's fighting. I did not know even the circumstances that had precipitated the conflict. As I came through Alchem, for that was the way I returned and not through Sen and Old Woking, I saw along the western horizon a blood-red glow, which I drew nearer, crept slowly up the sky, and driving clouds of the gathering thunderstorm mingled there with masses of black and red smoke. Ripley Street was deserted, and except for a lighted window or so, the village showed not a sign of life. But I narrowly escaped an accident at the corner of the road to Pierford, where a knot of people stood with their backs to me. They said nothing to me as I passed. I do not know what they knew of the things happening beyond the hill. Nor do I know if the silent houses I passed on the way were sleeping securely, or deserted and empty, or harassed and watching against the terror of the night. From Ripley until I came through Pierford, I was in the valley of the Wey. and the red glare was hidden from me. As I ascended the hill beyond Hereford Church, the glare came into view again. The trees about me shivered above the first intimation of the storm that was upon me. That I heard midnight pealing out from Hereford Church behind me. Then came the silhouette of Maybury Hill, with its treetops and roofs black and sharp against the red. Even as I beheld this, a lurid green glare lit the road above me and showed the distant world towards Addlestone. I felt a tug at the rein. I saw that the driving clouds had been pierced as if were by a thread of green fire. Suddenly lightning the confusion and falling into the field to my left. There's a third falling star! It was on its apparition and blindingly violet by contrast, stands out the first lightning, the gathering storm. And the thunder burst like a rocket overhead. The horse took the bit between his teeth and bolted. A moderate incline run towards the foot of Maybury Hill, and down this we clattered. Once the lightning had begun, it went on in as rapid a succession of flashes as I had ever seen. The thunderclaps treading out on the heels of another, and with a strange crackling accompaniment, sounded more like the working of a gigantic electric machine than the usual detonation reverberations. The flickering light was blinding and confusing, and a thin hail smote gustily at my face. They drove down the slope. At first, I regarded little but the road before me, and then abruptly my attention was arrested by something that was moving rapidly down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill. At first, I took it for the wet roof of a house, but one flash following another showed it to be in swift, rolling movement. It was an elusive vision. A moment of bewildering darkness, and then, in the flash-like daylight, the red masses of the orphanage near the crest of the hill, the green tops of the pine trees, and the problematical object came out clear and sharp and bright. This thing I saw! How can I describe it? A monstrous tripod, higher than most houses, striding over the young pine trees, and smashing them aside in its career. A walking engine of glittering metal, striding now across the heather, articulate ropes of steel dangling from it, and a clattering tumult of its passage, mingling with the ride of the thunder. A flash, and it came out vividly, wheeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and to reappear almost instantly, and it seemed, with the next flash. 100 yards near. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bullet belly along the ground? That was the impression those instant flashes gave. But instead of a milking stool, imagine it a great body of machinery on a tripod to stand. And suddenly, the trees and the pine wood ahead of me were parted, as brittle reeds are parted by a man thrusting through them. They were snapped off and driven headlong, and a second huge tripod appeared, rushing as it seemed, headlong towards me. It was galloping hard to meet it. At the sight of the second monster, my nerve went altogether. Not stopping to look again, I rushed the horse's head hard around to the right. In another moment of the dog cart had heeled over upon the horse. The shaft smashed noisily, and now swung sideways and fell heavily into a shallow pool of water. I crawled out almost immediately and crouched, my feet still in the water, under a clump of firs. The horse lay motionless. His neck was broken. Poor brute. And by the lightning flashes, I saw the black bulk of the overturned dog cart and the silhouette of the wheel, still spinning slowly. In another moment, the colossal mechanism went striding by me and passed uphill towards Pierford. Seen nearer, the thing was incredibly strange, for it was no mere insensate machine driving on its way. Machine it was, with a ringing metallic pace and long, flexible, glittering tentacles. Don't look at me! One of which gripped a young pine tree, swinging and rattling about its strange body. It picked its throat as if it were striding along, and the brazen hood that surmounted it moved it to and fro, the inventable suggestion of a head looking about. Behind the main body was a huge mass of white metal like a gigantic fisherman's basket, and puffs of green smoke squirted out from the joints of the limbs. As the monster swept by me, in an instant it was gone. Hmm. So much I saw then, all really for the flickering of the lightning, in blinding highlights and dense black shadows. As it passed, it set up an exultant, deafening howl that drowned the thunder. Alloo! Alloo! In another minute, it was with his companion, half a mile away, stooping over something in the field. I had no doubt this thing in the field was a third of the 10 cylinders they had fired at us from Mars. For some minutes I lay there in the rain and darkness, watching. With the intermittent light, these monstrous beings of metal moving about in the distance over the hedge tops. A thin hill was now beginning, and then they came to it and their figures grew misty and then flashed into clearness again. Now and then came a gap in the lighting, and the night swallowed them up. I was soaked with hail above and puddled water below. It was soaked with hail above and puddled. It was some time before my blank astonishment would let me struggle the blank to a drier position, or think all of my immediate peril. Not far from me was a little one-room squatter's hut of wood, surrounded by a patch of potato garden. I struggled to my feet at last, and counting and making use of every chance of cover. I made a run for this. Oh yeah. I hammered at the door, but I could not make the people hear, if there were any people inside. And after a time I desisted, and availing to myself of a ditch for the greater part of the way, succeeded in crawling, unobserved by these monstrous machines, through the pine woods towards Maybury. Under cover of this I pushed on, wet and shivering now, toward my own house. I walked upon the trees trying to find the footpath. It was very dark indeed in the wood. The lightning was now becoming infrequent, and the hail, which was pouring down in a torrent, fell in columns through the gapes in the heavy foliage. If I had fully realized the meaning of all the things I had said, I should have immediately worked my way around through Byfield to Street Cobham, and so gone back to rejoin my wife at Leatherhead. But that night, the strangeness of things about me and my physical wretchedness prevented me, for I was bruised, weary, wet to the skin, deafened and blinded by the storm. No, I really need to work on the cameras in my phone versus motion tracker when I'm reading books. Oh well. I had a vague idea of going on to my own house, and that was as much motive as I had. I staggered through the trees, fell into a ditch and bruised my knees against a plank, and finally smashed out into the lane that rode down from the College Arms. I say splashed, for the storm was sweeping across the sand down the hill in a muddy torrent. There in the darkness, a man blundered into me and sent my reading back. He gave a cry of terror, sprang sideways, and rushed on before I could gather my wits sufficiently to speak to him. Though heavy was the stress of the storm, just as this place that I had the hardened this task to win my way up to the hill. I went close up to the fence on the left and worked my way along its palings. Near the top, I stumbled upon something soft, and, by a flash of lightning, saw between my feet in a heap of black broadcloth and a pair of boots. Before I could distinguish clearly how the man lay, the flicker of light had passed. I stood over him waiting for the next flash. When it came, I saw that he was a sturdy man, cheaply but not shabbily dressed. His head went bent under his body, and he lay crumpled upon the close of the fence, as he thought he had been flung violently against it. Overcoming the repugnance natural to one who had never seen before touch a dead body, I turned him over to feel for his heart. He was quite dead. Apparently his neck had been broken. The lightning flashed for a third time, and his face leaped upon me. I sprang to my feet. It was the landlord of the Spotted Dog, whose conveyance I had taken. Oof, that gotta hurt. I stepped over him gingerly and pushed up on the hill. I made my way by the police station and the College Arms towards my own house. Nothing was burning on the hillside, though from the common there still came a red glare and a rolling tumult of ruddy smoke, beating up against the drenched hail. So far as I could see by the flashes, the houses above me were mostly uninjured, but the College Arms a dark heap lay in the road. Down the road towards Maybury Bridge, there were voices at the sound of feet, but I had not had the courage to shout or to go to them. I let myself in with the latchkey, closed, locked, and bolted the door. Staggered to the foot of the staircase and sat down. My imagination was full of those spreading metallic monsters, the dead bodies smashed against the fence. I crouched at the foot of the staircase with my back to the wall, shivering violently. Okay, so folks, that's where we're gonna call it a night. It was a very short stream. I started late. I apologize for that. But hopefully tomorrow, depending on not flying to a food coma, we may be streaming Tactics Ogre since that game comes in from FedEx. If not, we'll definitely be playing Pokemon Scarlet Friday. Alright, folks, thanks. Sorry for the short stream. I shall catch you all later. You all have a good night.